All right. It is one of my favorite times of the year. It is tier list time, and I decided to do something a little different. Normally, I had this big PowerPoint slideshow, and I'd go through and I'd like make my tier list, and then I would go pull the cards and make this and talk about each deck individually. I have a lot on my plate right now. It's a little hard to do this in the same way. If you want to go hear some of these old archetypes, I think that like these are still really nice videos for players that are just getting adjusted to the game. But instead, I have something a little different. I went on Tier Maker and I pulled about one card from every deck that I think could make sense, like the general like quote unquote face card of the deck. And there's going to be some overlap on some of these. But in general, I like the idea of kind of doing this more live. And we'll see how this goes. If people don't like this, I'll go back to the other format for the next set. But I really want to get this out before Nationals and stuff. Of note, I'm going to be talking primarily about one deck format. I'm going to bring up two deck a little bit here, and maybe in a future video I'll go over because we just got all the details on nationals for the US and Europe, and I assume Australia will follow suit sometime this week. But talking about kind of the difference between one deck and two deck, and what decks I think are going to be viable or less viable as we go on. So if you've never been here for a tier list video of mine before, these are my tier list descriptions. Tier 1, these are the decks that I think are the most likely to win or top cut events, the decks to beat. Tier 2, I think Tier 2 decks can and will win events. But I think they have flaws. There's a bracket that needs to happen, or an unknown innovation, or something needs to change for these decks to start winning, or to be considered Tier 1. Tier 3, these are the decks that I think can sneak into top cut at large events. But I think if they face enough Tier 1 decks in top cut, I really don't think it's likely for them to actually win events. Rogue, these are decks that have severe flaws, but they'll cause upsets and twists. And then everything else, kind of the same as Rogue, just fun decks that like really need cards to be better. So if you want to know like how good I am, this is last sets. I had Refia, Gigawall, and Knights as the tier 1 decks. I did miss on Chaos Arc a little bit. I had Chaos Arc in like tier 1.5. And Mono Earth isn't on this at all. I think towards the end I would have put Mono Earth in this tier 1.5, particularly with the Chaos Arc variant. Um, but I think they're like missing Mono Earth. I guess Mono Earth's technically in tier 2. I thought I actually totally missed it. But you kind of see. Oh, Realm was the other big miss. I didn't have Realm anywhere near the top of tier 1. She should have been in here somewhere. So, now that we have that out of the way, let's get started. So first things first, let's go crown the best deck. The best deck of the current format is Mono Earth. I don't think this is particularly disputable. It's winning almost every major large event. I think that it has. To me, Mono Earth is just better Earth Wind Storm at this point. It does the same thing as far as try to ramp backups, and then once it ramps, it builds a big board and then attacks your resources with Tidus, or it continuously wipes you and rebuilds super well. Emmett Selk is kind of like just Noctis without the wind element. And I think that the way that this deck both pressures your backups and your resources while being very defensive most reminds me of the Earth, Wind, Storm decks when they're at its best. I think this deck is incredibly powerful. Second, I'm putting Refia Control here. I know this might be a little bit of an unpopular opinion. I think that some of the new stuff does prey on Refia quite a bit. I think Mono Earth can be difficult if Mono Earth ramps quickly enough. It kind of ends up in a situation where the Refia player has to be continuously holding up interaction or they're going to lose one of their backups, which is so important to the deck. I think that Hithlo can be a bit annoying because, or any monster deck in general, because there aren't the Raffia engine is so large that it doesn't have room to attack stuff like a Neo X Death or like a free cast Alexander. But I think in general, Raffia didn't lose enough for me to not put it in tier one. I also think that Witch can prey on Raffia, but I think Raffia doesn't hate Witch as much as people might think. I think that the ability to Amaterasu Witch on her entry is very underrated. And when you use Witch of the Fens, you kind of are outing a resource for Raffia that doesn't have access to otherwise. I almost think that Witch is a bit of a tricky thing to use against Raffia because sure, it feels really good to sacrifice a monster and now Raffia can't untap, or now their Ferris doesn't get to ping everything, but I do think that it is a very scary thing to be sacrificing your monsters to Raffia because Raffia is so good at rebuilding and so good at doing the thing every single turn while generating resources that she's kind of just happy to do it. I think it requires very careful management. Um, Third, I'm going to put Realm. This is kind of a nebulous concept, but Realm is just kind of any monster focused deck. You could also kind of put Witch of the Fens here, but I've seen this played in every element combination except for I think Ice is the only one that like really doesn't have a lot of merits. Like Ice Water Realm, but like Mono Water Realm, Water Wind Realm, I think Water Earth, Water Fire, Water Lightning all have a lot of reasons to see play. I think the printing of Witch is a massive buff to these decks, but again, Witch is a very weird card because you need to be managing your resources and the ratios are very tricky. But I do just kind of think that like Realm in general is in such a fantastic place that I don't think I can not put this in tier one. Lastly, this is one that I'm not sure on. It's undisputably going to take up a pretty good chunk of top cut. I'm talking about Chaos, and I think Chaos as a deck is very powerful. But I also think it's really low agency. And for that, I think it's hard to evaluate because I really don't know that the best players at any given tournament, especially in a one deck format, are going to be willing to gamble their tourney on Chaos. You're running 9 dark cards, or 10 dark cards if you play a Spiritus. You are kind of just like gambling that your opponent isn't going to hit enough burst to not die, and the best decks in the game in like Refi is running 25 bursts. Water Fire, Water Lightning, they're on 25 bursts. Mono Earth is on so many ways to wipe the field and the break zone for the Gilgamesh. I'm a bigger fan of the Ice variant. I think that like the ceiling is higher, but the floor is lower. But like I think if you're playing Chaos, you should be looking to high roll anyway. So I think I'm gonna put it in tier one. I think of the top tier decks, it's the least likely to win an event, but it's also like if you enter an event with this and know what you're doing, I think you're very likely to get to top cut. But you're not gonna have a lot of say in that. I really don't know how appealing that is. It's not appealing to me as a player, and I think other good players probably are gonna feel the same way. I do think a lot of this doesn't apply for two deck. I think in two deck, Chaos elevates itself to being one of the best decks in a two deck format, just because the burst density is so much lower in a two deck format. You can't just pack the best bursts in your colors and then feel good about your second deck in the same way. Only one deck can play Lev 6 and Kukulin and Mist Dragon and Amaterasu and all these cards that. Well, Amaterasu isn't even very good against Chaos, but you get the idea. I think for now, that's all I would really put in tier one. Actually, I'm going to put Knights in tier one as well. I don't think Knights lost nearly enough to not consider them a top deck. I think the printing of Beatrix helps actually quite a bit. I think their matchup into Chaos is surprisingly good. You kind of do the two ships passing on the night thing, but I think Laswell is such a huge equalizer for you. And if you can get like, you know that Chaos isn't playing interaction, so if you get like the Ramza Corilla, Laswell Dream, you just kind of win the game. You just kill stuff and dull freeze all their things and win. I think that Knights is a deck with more agency than Chaos, which is good. But I do think that its matchup against Refia and Ingus is pretty poor. But I do think it's a deck that can win tournaments. 1.5. There are going to be quite a few here. I'm going to put Ash. This is representing Mono Water as a deck. I think Mono Water is fine. I really don't like its matchup into Mono Earth or Refia control. I do think that Mono Water is one of the best homes for Realm, so you can combine these, play like a Realm shell with this, and you're kind of getting a tier 1 deck and a tier 1.5 deck at the same time. Some of this is kind of nebulous. It's a little bit tricky to actually evaluate, but I think I don't love Mono Water into some of these decks, but I do think that you can't deny that it is really good, and especially in a 2-deck format. I think it, like, arguably the tier 1 of a 2-deck format is going to be Mono Earth and Mono Water. You get to kind of play the best cards in both elements. And you make use of just about all the power cards in the game by doing that. Hithlo combo, I think, is a weird one. I'm going to put it in 1.5. But this deck could be tier 1, or it could be like the bottom of tier 2. But I also think that like the metagame space it occupies is really unique and really scary. I think that you have to prepare for this deck in a way. And the interaction for it is very specific. You need cards that interact. You have either enough summons to be able to reliably cast 2 summons in the same turn, or you need to be able to break the Cleone without, and then play a summon that interacts. Like, it's just so difficult to interact with this deck once it gets rolling. It does have a lot of weaknesses. I think that it like literally can't beat the Chaos deck, which is one of the biggest problems with it. You go into the Chaos matchup and they make you discard 2 in your first turn, and the combo is just dead at that point. You have to hard draw all of the pieces because you don't have time to go for Realm, and I really do think you just kind of lose. But against, like, I think it also is a deck with a really favorable Mono Earth matchup. I don't know what Mono Earth is meant to do into it. Like, you like if you go first, you can Shantoto LB and then Mist Dragon, but that feels really bad. So, I'm gonna put a couple of decks here. Earth, Water, Water, Lightning, and do I have like a Tyvus? I do. And Tyvus. I think these are like the mid-range decks that are meant to handle the aggression of Chaos and try to out-tempo like the Mono Earth deck. All of these are water secondary elements. I think that Water, Fire, Warriors is probably the best way of playing it. Water, Lightning, obviously. You can play this with Scions. You could play this with, I think you could play it with the FF8 package as well. A lot of different options there. Earth, Water, this is kind of like the Chaos Arc pile that was so popular among people that were trying to beat Refia. I think one of the biggest arguments against that deck was that it didn't beat Refia control. Like, I think Refia was favored, which is horrifying that the 4-color deck beat the Chaos Arc deck, but here we are. I think that I would probably put it this way. And I think that's probably all I would do for tier 1.5. I think these decks are all really similar. They're kind of, again, they're tempo-y. They run a ton of bursts. And they're just intending to try to survive these matchups and then outpace like the Refia and the Mono Earth match. Tier 2. Lots of stuff to put in here. Where am I going? I think the Warriors of Darkness is definitely about tier 2. You could do this a lot of different ways. Earth, Wind, Earth, Lightning, Mono Earth. You could play Earth, Water if you wanted to. I mean, the cool thing is that because Noct cheats the cost on them, you almost get like Cloud access for free in an Earth X deck, which is just like pretty nice. Ice Lightning, similarly, I think is just always in a spot where it's capable of winning tourneys, but I don't think it's ever the favorite to win one. I think I'd probably rate it above that. I think Twins are probably about tier 2. I think they're kind of slept on, but they're still like this deck that can beat up on aggro decks and then not lose to control decks because they can kind of outpace them. I think LB Cloud is a huge problem, but if you look at the best decks right now, actually, these don't have very easy access to Cloud, with the exception of Chaos. And without easy access to Chaos, I actually think the Twins can kind of start to run away with the game. So I think it's a really interesting anti-meta call right now to go on Twins. Scions, I'm going to put in tier 2 as well. I really think this is a deck with a lot of potential. I've really messed with particularly Mono Lightning, but even Water Lightning, I think is, again, you can kind of make it into Water Lightning, and I think it kind of elevates it to a tier 1.5. But I really do think the printing of Estinian was kind of like a shot in the arm for the deck. I think Earth Lightning is viable, giving you access to Mist Dragon as well. Just a really, really strong deck all the way around. Where do I want to go from here? I think Megissa is a pretty easy tier 2. It's like the aggro deck that beats other aggro decks. If I were to order these, Warrior Darkness is probably down here. That's probably there. Megissa's probably here. Megissa obviously won a tourney last set. I do think that, like, it's going to struggle into Mono Earth. I don't think it has a favorable matchup into Refia. I think it doesn't interact particularly favorably with monsters outside of Amaterasu, having Amaterasu access for Realm. But it is very good at kind of doing its thing and kind of handling aggro, because all of the stuff that pings Megissa can also just double as utility removal against the Chaos deck. And yeah. I think the X and Melee package, I would put around tier 2. This is like the weird water crystal thing. Again, I think you can combine this with Realm. I think is really strong. Chaos Arc, another kind of modifier you can apply to almost any deck that has summon recursion. Most commonly, I think Mono Lightning, Earth Lightning, and Earth Water. But I do think that like this is a thing you can do if your matchup is particularly bad into some of these multi-element decks. I do think people underrate about Chaos Arc is how good it is into aggression. Into like the Chaos Arc thing, if you can stick your own Chaos in response, you get a forward, you pop another one and make them discard, and then you just need to find your Man in Black or your Une, and you kind of just win the game. Because they don't have the removal that they need to continuously deal with your Chaos. So I do think that like that's an underrated thing. Is I think Chaos Arc might actually have a decent matchup into the Chaos aggro stuff. It also does really well into Knights. They can't really hold a hand. You take one of their forwards, you pop the last well, and they're kind of stuck in a situation where like they're just not really able to progress their game state while the Chaos sits on the field. I'm gonna put Gigawall. This probably goes, I think, right here. I think it has lost a little bit with Mono Earth and Refia being the two best decks. I'm going to put Gigawall here. I think Gigawall really just has a bad matchup into Chaos in particular. If you go second and Chaos makes you discard, or like say you go first, you play a backup, and then Chaos makes you discard 2, you now like are completely reliant on hitting cards with Warrior of Light, which means that your Axstar is less live. If you hit 2 backups, you kind of just die on the spot. You can't preserve for the special. So I think the Chaos matchup in particular is so bad with Warrior of Light that I would put it in tier 2 for now. It just doesn't have the tools to match up into this favorably at all. I do think it has the ability to win a tourney as long as it dodges Chaos. Again, anything I think in tier 2 has the potential to win tourneys. Put Mono Ice here. This is like the Mono Ice turbo discard stuff. This did really, really well in the Japan Standard Championship, and really hasn't seen any like play anywhere else. I do think that, like, again, the new format, the chaos matchup can be a little bit weird for it. Kind of ends up in a situation of like whoever goes first or goes off first is in a really bad spot, or no, yeah, it's just very strange. But I think that the lockout state that this deck gets to relatively quickly is almost unmatched. I think Anima is the most broken card that nobody's playing right now. Every time I've played this card and resolved it, it just like says I win the game now. So I'm gonna put that there. I'm gonna put Bart's Refia here as well. I think Bart's Refia was, I think, the consensus best way of playing the deck towards the end of last format. I think Refia is going to revert back to playing more bursts again. I think it has to. It just doesn't have an option. You have to survive the chaos matchup. And the additional speed that Bart's provided was a nice bonus, but I think that the 3-cost Bart's in particular does not do a lot in this format. Last format it helped a lot with dealing with knights. You could just ping off the Laswell on site. Now it gets kind of big to block like the Raijin or the Chaos if you have to commit to it early. So I'm gonna put this in tier 2 for now. I could be proven wrong towards the end of the set. If everybody congregates around Mono Earth, I think that this build of Warrior of Light is actually better into Mono Earth than the classic Refia control. But I think Bart's Refia is so bad into some of the aggro around that I wouldn't really be considering it unless I really was hoping for a good bracket. Yeah, a lot of decks here. Let's get some of these out of the way. I think Soiree at this point is probably just not the favored way of playing 4-color good stuff. I think 4-color good stuff is a deck that is good and powerful and should see consideration. But I think if you're doing that, you probably don't want the Soiree package anymore. I think at this point you're relying on rares and a hero from Opus 16. I think the bursts are nice, but I think you have to get to a critical mass before the bursts really start mattering, which doesn't help against like the chaos stuff. Like the you have to get like 3 backups turn 1 for like the chaos hitting a Elvis to kill something. I'm gonna put the mono ice control deck in tier 3. This got second in Singapore actually. I know Steve is really big on this. I really just don't see this deck ever winning an event right now. I'm going to put this above here. I think there is a lot of potential. I think that like it's funny because Kate Sith was revealed and people just like that's it. That's the legend. But I do also think Kate Sith will be obnoxious as hell if you actually like play against it. I just don't know what deck consistently gets to the backups to play the card. So it's one of those things like the deck has a fine power level, but I really don't see it winning events. Ice Earth, I'm going to put here. God, am I actually putting? I'm going to put Leo in tier 3. I really don't. I think if you're doing stupid Leo stuff, you're probably better served doing stupid Hitflow stuff instead. FF8, I'm going to put here kind of next to Scions. I think this is about tier 2. Really, really strong deck. Just, like I said, very splashable as well. I think you could go as low as 3 Adia, 3 Cypher, and then like 2 Raijin. And this deck is totally fine to function. You have targets to search, you have targets to recur, because Adia and Cypher kind of form this little loop. I'm going to put Mira at the bottom of tier 2. I think this does need a really favorable bracket run to get there. In particular, it cannot hit Gilgamesh BE at all, or it just loses. But against Refia, it's actually quite strong. It can beat Mono Earth if it generates enough pressure where they have to Shantoto early and then has time to rebuild. Samurais, this is in tier 3. I kind of think it's still underexplored, as is Mono Fire. The biggest problem, I think Tenzin is independently really strong, but the rest of the Samurais haven't really kept pace. So you end up in the situation now where you're dedicating a lot of slots to Tenzin as an engine, and I just don't think the payoff is quite there. If you get like Chaos and lose a Tenzin immediately, you kind of are not in a great spot. Same for like Mont Leonis. The problem with Mont Leonis is it loses to Amat and Mist Dragon and all these other cards. So I think the payoff for Mont is really powerful. And I think in 2-deck format, these actually could be elevated quite a bit. But I really think they're going to struggle into the exact things the top tiers are doing. Monks, another tribal deck, another deck that goes under tier 3. Again, I just think it's kind of a worse way of playing Mono Earth at the moment. I'm going to put Turks in tier 3. I know a lot of tribals are going to go here. Vikings are very similar as well. Just these big aggro. I'm going to put a bunch of forwards in the field and try to kill you. Decks. I know Turks have like a turn 2 kill now. Vikings have always been able to just flood the field. Now with Ferris, they get really big, or you get like Bikke and make them like on target, or like they don't take damage now, so they don't die to like damage based board wipes. I think the problem with Vikings still just is that like Ferris is a French vanilla, and the actual bodies themselves are so small it's very hard to pressure. I'm going to put Arden under other. I really don't expect people to be playing this or seeing it much at all, but I'm going to put Vikings under other as well. So this is, again, if you want to play flippy nonsense and try to win the game off of your flips, you could just play Hitflow, and Hitflow is just a better version of the same deck. Stranger of Paradise stuff, I think, falls under other. Again, nothing under other is like unviable, especially at like the local level. And I don't think the Stranger of Paradise cards are necessarily weak, but there's just not really a reason to play them for the cost of playing them. I'm gonna put Category 6 under Tier 3. I do really like the Lock remains a really powerful card. I do think Nalapa is so strong. I think that like a lot of the ice cards, you could play, I think, Fire Ice Water, Fire Ice Lightning, and all of those have merits in this deck now. I think the Pratik of Gestal means that like you could play Stooges in this deck again and feel pretty happy about it. It's just kind of underexplored. The pop-off turn is turn 3, which is a really bad pop-off turn to have because it's like the turn you're dead on Chaos. And I don't think that interacts very well with the Fujin Raijin Chaos board, which I think is the biggest, scariest thing about playing this deck. But I really do like a lot of things that this deck has access to now. I think the Limit Break deck is a huge buff in particular. Ninjas, I'm going to put in tier 3. I think ninjas are kind of underexplored again, but I do think that the combination of Yuffie and Edge for removal are really interesting and powerful. I'm going to put Dancers at like the top of other. I don't really expect this to be doing much at attorney level, but I do think it has potential, especially like if they just got a decent, like a 2 CP vanilla standard unit backup, they would be in business. But they don't. And so like they're in this weird tri-color pie because they want to play Lightning because Lilith is the reason to play the deck. But there's no other reason to play Lightning in the deck. And then you have issues of like summons are everywhere right now to try to deal with some of the aggression, and summons just hose the deck. It's just in a really rough spot. Despite being, I still think closer than people think. I do think Lilith is a hell of a card. As is Mayakov. Like Mayakov and Lilith remains, I think, some of the most obnoxious cards in the game. I'm gonna put Waltzes in tier 3. Actually, I kind of like this deck right now. I think there's just a world where like you could jam a Waltz 3 on turn 1, and then your opponent goes for the Chaos board, and you just go, okay, pop that. I'll take some damage, and then I'll get my cards back from the break zone anyway. And you kind of both end on nothing, except the Waltz player has the ability to rebuild with like Waltz getting back a VV. I think it had a really interesting matchup into Refia, given how low on the curve a lot of cards are right now. I think that Zidane is so nice for this deck as well. In particular, if you're against Chaos now, you can sacrifice the Zidane instead of the Waltz 3, and you're totally fine with that because the Zidane did his job on entry. And you can still stick the Waltz to just kind of control the game. You can ditch two Waltz or like ditch two Waltzes to kill the Fujin and the Raijin on resolution. And then when the Chaos makes you discard another Waltz that kills the Chaos. And they have an empty board. You stuck the Waltz 3, and like, what are they going to do, right? Knights don't have a clean answer to this. They go for their thing. You go this. You pop the last well, and they just never have a chance to stick him again. Seems really decent. I don't know what the deck looks like. I'm going to be honest, but I do think after it topped in Texas, I think this deck is being kind of slept on. I'm going to actually put it like a lot higher than people really think it might be. Something like this looks decent to me. Kind of another flippy deck, but I think that like the Reagan aggro deck where you like tried to Reagan out a Vayne to pull in a Theodore is difficult to play against. I just don't know how that matches up against like the top tiers. Again, decks are on so many bursts, and if you're trying to do flippy stuff, again, Hitflow is right. Hitflow and Chaos are right there. Cloudpod, I'm gonna put you in top of tier 3. I don't think that this deck has lost too much. I think there's a lot of potential for it as the 4-color engine of choice. But I think it's probably the worst of like the classic, like the King package or the FF10 package. I think is also really good in 4-color good stuff. I think that the Elfie Gige Jesse package is really strong and has a lot of potential. But again, like you have this weird option of like, do you play the Cloud? Because if you don't play the Cloud, I think that like Barrett Yuffie is absurd, but you need to like find a way to like you can go like Gige to get Barrett or Yuffie, play the Barrett for free, play the Yuffie, pop something, attack the Yuffie, pop something again. Really strong. Waff, I'm gonna put in other. This just doesn't have any results to it. Rain is still a really messed up card. Especially giving stuff like the Squall Haste, force discards, and make it impossible to block, and ping things down. But again, it's just kind of like Vikings by another name in a way. Like it. There's a really good Yu-Gi-Oh article. It's about there's a deck in Yu-Gi-Oh called Raid Raptor, and something people were trying to do in Raid Raptor was make a card that says your opponent can't activate cards during their turn, and that's a thing you can do. And the problem that this article noted is that it said stop building more Centurion was that there was already a deck that was more adept at doing that wasn't top tier. So you're kind of like, if your goal with this deck is to play a hasty aggro deck that like is trying to kill your opponent quickly, you could just do that with Chaos and you kind of have the same thing going. Or Knights. Like Knights is just kind of a better version of the same deck. Terra summons, I'm gonna put in other for now. This deck hasn't had any showing in a while. It's like the Ice Lightning Terra with like you run like literally like 3 Terra, 3 mana black as your only like forwards. You run a bunch of the Shivas and try to loop the Shivas with the Terra. You kind of achieve the same lockout state that you get to with like Ice, like turbo discard decks, with like an even stronger late game. But if your opponent doesn't have cards in hand to play, like what's the late game look like anyway? So I really don't think it's a ton of merit. It's still probably my second favorite card in the game behind Fiona. But there just isn't really a viable home for her. And at this point, I'm really not sure there is going to be one. Terra is just getting to be a more and more contested name. And there's just other things you can do with summons these days. I do I'm gonna put the Siren Rug aggro decks in tier. I'm gonna put it in tier 2. I think there is some merit to these decks as just like uninteractable decks that try to do their thing. You just like try to stick Siren plus Rug. Top of tier 3. I'm gonna put the Rug in like tier 2. I do think that Rug kills you very quickly. I think that the Siren deck has a lot of potential, but again, the high burst density and Siren can't protect from bursts is going to be a downfall of this deck at some point. Um, it is very difficult to deal with Rug plus Siren on the field at the same time. You can't target them, and nothing really beats a 9k first striker that you can't ever target. Archfiends goes in tier other. This is just, there's no representation for this deck at the moment. There's not a reason to play it. I love this deck. I think it's really, really fun to play. If there ever was like a deck where you like, or a tourney where you couldn't play meta stuff, I think that Archfiend Count 4 is one of the funnest decks in the game. But again, if you die on turn 2 to Chaos or turn 3, you go like back up Warp, which is what the play pattern on Golbas is intended to be, you're dead. Like, what, you're dead before you ever get a chance to play any cards or to get any value from Golbas. Dragoons, I'm actually going to put in tier 3. I think this deck is fast enough, potentially, with the sheer quantity of Dragoon backups in the game at this point. And I think that, like, it can easily get top cut. I just don't know where it gets there. Earthwind, I'm going to put in tier 3 towards, like, the top. I think that, like, there's a lot of potential for Earthwind Storm. I just think it's worse than what Mono Earth does, and they kind of do similar-ish things. Guardians, just not really any representation for them. This used to be my go-to starter deck recommendation of choice. Now I would say it's Retainers with Noctis. I think it just has more potential long-term for things you can do with the deck. I'm going to put Retainers at the top of tier 3. I do think there's potential for this to be like here. You do have a really strong removal engine that like decks like Chaos and Knights can't always interact with in a favorable way. I think that like I like tier 2 for this. I think the buffs to it are really nice as well. The Ignis backup, meaning that like Prompto now only needs the Gladio on field, is really, really nice. I'm going to stick to my guns here. I think the Retainers are actually about tier 2. Xenos aggro. There's no representation for this deck. It's kind of just worse 13, which is already struggling a bit. I'm going to put 13 at the top of tier 3. I do think that, like, I know that people are like, well, with Cloud's printing, but, like, again, the top decks aren't playing Cloud right now. I don't think it's unreasonable to expect to stick 2 forwards on turn 1 sometimes with what people are doing. And sure, Burst still hose this deck, but I think Sarah is absurdly good as a floodgate. And like shutting down Knights and a lot of these other decks that run a bunch of weenies. Avalanche is just MIA. I think at this point, like if you want to play an FF7 focus deck, you play like Cloud Pod, or you play like Ice Lightning. Ice Lightning is at this point a 7 deck in all but name. I'm gonna put like FF13 mid range in tier 3 as well. I don't know what to make of this deck. I'm not a big hope believer for now. I do see people like saying like, well, it plays any character from the deck. It's got a lot of potential going forward. But like, what's it actually do now? Like, if you die in 2 turns, you just don't get the value off of hope blinking every turn. So then you have to get something that turn that like stabilizes you. I do think its interaction with multi-elements is very strong. Playing like a Vanille from deck for 2, or the 2-element Snow, for instance, is really cool. But again, you're also playing Wind in 13, which is an element that doesn't historically wanted to play. So I'm going to put it in tier 3 for now. Kingsglaive, I'm gonna put another. I really don't see this deck doing much. I don't think Drautos is like a buff the deck wanted or needed. The new stuff doesn't push the deck forward. Um, I do think that like it is cute that you can go like the new Earth Regis revive um, Libertus and Nyx, and you kind of end up with like a bunch of big guys on field out of nowhere on damage 5. And Libertus is still one of very few 4 CP bursts in the game, provided you have a Nyx to recur. But this deck is not seeing any top tier representation at the moment. This is going to be another hot take. I'm going to put Cadets in tier 3. I know people are like, oh, Cadets are so bad. Ace is almost as Ace is just Firion. He really is just Firion, and I don't know how like if there's an easier way to explain how strong this card is. The downside is you have to play some number of cadets, and the only two that are currently like slam dunks are Trey and Ren. As like EX burst backup that pick up each other. So if you can find like the 1 to 2 other cadets to play, like not some combination of 9 king, queen, and jack, I do think Ace has like that kind of potential as a sub engine in something. I'll put it here. Summoners, I'm gonna put top of tier 3. I think there's a lot of potential for the archetype in general. I know that she was seeing play earlier this set in like Firewater EX bursts. You can run a bunch of summons. She gives you removal. The biggest fear with this card, really, to me, is just like how badly she interacts with Amaterasu, because everything she does creates a stack. And if you pay 5, you get Amaterasu before you get your first draw off of her, I think you just kind of lose the game. I think Wind at this point is tier 3. Like I was thinking about it the other day when I was playing the Earth Wind Storm stuff, and I was thinking about the Mono Earth matchup. And Mono Earth both got to attack my resources, and I just never got to interact with it with the way they were going, because like they're so fast, and Wind in particular does not have a consistent enough cancel spell to deal with it. And if you get like lose a forward, lose a backup, and eat a point of damage there, like what do you do at that point? Like Shinryu doesn't really do it, and like Luso's strong, but your entire board dies to Genova Synthesis every single turn, and you're also like deadly fearful of Amaterasu at any point on like your Rosa. I just don't understand what Wind does right now that's stronger than any of the top tier decks. Mono Earth, like I said, Mono Earth basically has a built-in Luso with Genova Synthesis. As funny as it sounds to say, like Montleonis with like 8 characters on field is just Luso. It really is. You draw the card, which is the thing, and then you get the board wipe out of it. You get to cast a bunch of cards. You get to stabilize so much easier into aggro. You get to play Mist Dragon to stop your opponent on their turn. You get to play Tidus, which is such a blowout card when he resolves. Like, is Ace on that level? I don't really think it is. Like, they're doing that for cheaper. I really would like to see Wind get some tools. Like, it feels like they're tiptoeing around the problem with Wind. I don't know what the solution is, but I even think it loses to Mono Water now, or like it's even in what used to be an unlosable matchup, just because Tidus is so strong and it's so difficult for Wind to keep down. Like the Piranhas and Tidus in particular, I think just flip that matchup entirely. They just get to stick so many more and cheaper bodies while also now when you both get to 5 backups, they get to set you back a turn, and you just get to like sort of board wipe. I don't know. I think the matchups in the top tier are so bad for wind that I really don't see it winning events right now. Sky Pirates, I'm gonna put top of other. I think that like again, you have this really powerful draw engine, but you're you're playing a worse Refia control. Refia is just a better version of Vaughn at the end of the day. So I think Cecil as a package is up here in tier 2. I think that the Cecils are really strong. The question is Rydia. I still think I'm going to put in tier 3. There's a lot of merits to Rydia. You can play a lot of bursts. I think it plays very well with a lot of 4-color stuff and like the Cecils. But I do think it's just scary in a world where Cloud exists to play Rydia. You kind of like get to have your opponent eat your first Amaterasu out of hand for the cost of 2 cards in hand and 2 LB cards. There's bursts out the wazoo, and all of them stop you. 6 CP Levy sets back Rydia so far. It's so hard to keep her powered up right now. And I'm gonna put Griever top of tier 3 as well. I think there is like this is like the reactivation deck that like plays like Griever and Sarah Mobius and Sage and Rosa. And at the end of the day, the control decks are completely equipped to handle this deck, and the other aggro decks don't struggle with it. So I think that looks like a tier list. Let me know what you all think. I hope you all enjoyed it. It's a lot of fun doing this kind of live. I'm sure there's some of these placements that I'm going to look at later and go, I don't know about that one, but let's see. I feel pretty good tier 1. Tier 2, I really like that order as well. Tier 3, I think this probably goes down a bit. This probably goes up some. Yeah, I like that. Rydia can go down a bit here. Oh, this is a Fran aggro, or like Fran Turbo. I'm gonna put her kind of towards. I think Soiree is a pretty good comparison for Fran aggro. It's like a different type of deck, but they do kind of similar-ish things. Ice Earth probably goes here next to those. They're really similar decks. I would probably rate Ice Earth over Mono Ice Control. I'm gonna actually do a bit of a hot take. We're gonna move the waltzes there. I'm gonna put Lock up here next to Samurais. I think Icewind might be stronger than Mono at the moment. Just interacts a little bit more favorably. Yeah, I think I like the way this looks. I'm not gonna really order. I think all these decks are totally viable for locals. I think they're all really fun and really cool. I just don't think I would be taking any of them to a Materia Cup. I just think the support for a lot of these is just a little too old at this point. Fingers crossed. Next set, we should hopefully get a second wave of Stranger of Paradise support. By the way, it'd be nice to see some of these cards, see some play. Yeah, thanks for watching. Hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll see you all in the next one. Let me know if you want to see like a 2-deck reevaluation where I kind of talk about some of these in a 2-deck format, what goes up, what goes down, what gets better, and yeah.